2.5 years after resigning as Secretary of State. In a wide-ranging interview yesterday on Meet the Press, Powell defended the invasion of Iraq, but he also criticized the management of the war after the fall of Saddam. But the most notable exchange involved Powell's view of the upcoming presidential race. Powell was, of course, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under the first President Bush, and he ran the State Department under the current Bush. In other words, he has been a Republican. Yet Powell says he now has had significant discussions with at least one Democrat running for president. Here's Colin Powell on Barack Obama.
I met with Senator Obama twice. I've been around this town a long time, and I know everybody who is running for office. And I make myself available to talk about foreign policy matters and military matters with whoever wishes to chat with me.
Any endorsements?
Oh, not yet. It's too early.
But you'll support the Republicans?
It's too early.
Would you support an independent?
I'm going to support the best person that I can find who will lead this country for the 8 years beginning in January 2009.
Of any party?
The best person I can find.
Powell's willingness to vote for a Democrat in 2008 is interesting, as well as the obvious rebuke he gave to the Bush administration. But consider the opposite angle. Though he has escaped the deep public anger absorbed by the president, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, any number of others in this administration, Colin Powell was the chief salesman of the decision to invade and occupy Iraq. So the question is, why would Barack Obama want his advice in the first place? Joining us now, Senior Fellow and Director of Homeland Security at the Center for American Progress, P.J. Crowley. P.J., thanks for coming on.
Hello, Tucker.
So here's Colin Powell. I mean, not that I even need to repeat this, but just in case for the 8 people who may have forgotten that he's the reason we went to war, essentially. This is him at the UN in 2003. Quote, "The facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction." When I heard that, like a lot of Americans, I thought, case closed. If Colin Powell says it, it's got to be true. And it was totally untrue. Why the hell would Barack Obama, of all people, seek out his advice?
Well, two different issues. I mean, first of all, General Powell bears responsibility in part for where we find ourselves today. But from my standpoint, you put him down in the middle of the list. Obviously, others more strident, to the right of General Powell, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz bear the primary responsibility for how we got here. That said, look, Powell is a unique individual. I mean, he's been, during his career, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He's been the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State. And so he is uniquely positioned to look at foreign policy from multiple points of view. And I think it shouldn't be news in this day and age that you have a presidential candidate who's reaching out to a moderate on foreign policy.
Wait a second.
25 years ago, this was not news.
Okay. How is he a moderate on foreign policy? It seems to me, yes, Doug Feith and Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz all helped design the plan to invade Iraq, provided the intellectual framework for it. But they were not as credible in the public eye as Colin Powell was. He's the guy who sold it. Without him, no public support for war, I would argue. So, I mean, here's Barack Obama running an entire presidential campaign on the notion that he's against this war. If you're going to seek out Powell's advice, why not ask Cheney what he thinks?
Well, wait a second. I mean, in the Clinton administration, which I was part of, one evening, Bill Clinton had a lengthy conversation with Richard Nixon. We have elders.
He wasn't running against Nixon's policies. Well, that's my point.
And in fact, General Powell, even yesterday on Meet the Press, his voice is still very powerful. He said, for example, we have to get out of Guantanamo tomorrow. We should listen to him. General Powell said also that it may be time for us to evolve in terms of the don't ask, don't tell policy.
But I'm still confused as to why we ought to listen to him. I think every sober person who looks at his record as Secretary of State would conclude this is a guy who traveled less, I think, than any modern Secretary of State, who actually did not do a good job representing our views abroad, almost by definition, not a great success as Secretary of State, and the chief salesman behind this disastrous war. So why exactly is his views so sought after?
Well, look, he was not a successful Secretary of State,
no.
But is that because of General Powell, or is that because of the fact he was frozen out by some of the other hardliners?
We're cutting him a lot of breaks. We don't cut Doug Feith, I noticed.
The has a lengthy of distinguished. It is refreshing that we have a candidate who wants to craft a centrist policy that can reach across party lines. I admire the senator for doing it, whether he's successful or not.
Okay, but two things. One, he's not crafting a centrist policy. Hillary Clinton is actually a lot closer to the center than Barack Obama is. He's for a total withdrawal, as he says. Second, you can't imagine Hillary Clinton soliciting the advice of General Powell. You just can't imagine it. Why? Because she doesn't need it. The fact is that Barack Obama, for all his appeal, has been in the Senate for 2 years, a little over. You know what I mean? He has no bona fides. He is not a guy with a resume that suggests president. He needs to talk to Powell. I mean, this is a measure of his weakness, isn't it?
I mean, I'll leave it to pundits like you.
Can you imagine Hillary talking to Powell?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, what is important here is that you have a candidate for president who has reached out, across party lines to get a moderate voice. It intrigues me that, for example, a Democrat is reaching out to General Powell, and the Republicans are running as far away from the Bush administration and General Powell as they can.
Well, General Powell's running away from his own record. Don't you think he ought to, before progressing any further, before getting into the advice business, he ought to apologize to me and you and every other person who watched him on television who believed what he said and whose views changed as a result of that belief? Shouldn't he get up and just say, you know what, I completely blew it? Why doesn't he do what John Edwards is man enough to do?
It's a fairly long line there of people that have to do that. I think General Powell has tried to do some of that, but in defense of General Powell, he's the one guy within the administration who actually went to the CIA and tried to dig into the middle of the intelligence to find out exactly what it said and what it didn't say.
But he was wrong. Shouldn't you apologize when you're wrong? I just don't understand why Powell gets a pass. I like Powell. I'm not attacking Powell as a man. I just don't understand why every other figure, Paul Wolfowitz has to leave World Bank because of this, and Colin Powell is still an American hero, and he hasn't apologized.
Well, hang on a second. I mean, even today you have countries that are trying to indict Henry Kissinger, and yet today we have Henry Kissinger continuing to give the United States through the pages of the Washington Post. So, I mean, we have distinguished elders in our society, and whoever wants to be president should listen to them.
Well, I believe before there's redemption, there's an ask for, a request for forgiveness.
And as far as I know, Colin Powell is not running for something, but he may have a voice yet.
A.J. Crowley, thank you very much.
Okay, Tucker.
After the warm reception, President